Welcome, everyone, to this exciting workshop. I will send out a disclaimer right off the bat. This is not going to be an easy going, just sort of consume type of talk. We're going to dive deep into the architecture of human consciousness. It is a special that arose out of a member question. This question was, well, what is my soul? What is my spirit? What is my I? Are those all the same? And I'm going to walk you through this here bit by bit. Here you see the workshop series, Building a Bridge Between Spiritual and Material Worlds. We are at the 23rd recording of this, and we will end it with a two-part love and relationships workshop next month, and then move on to the step-by-step exploring the architecture of human consciousness as spiritual science workshop series, the new workshop series for 2025. All right, so yes, the dimensions of self, spirit, and I. Probably the most prevalent question that all humans ever, for as long as they have had consciousness, which is placed by our biologists to, or at the emergence of the Homo sapiens, which is the question, who am I? What is my true identity? Who am I beneath all these roles? What is guiding me? What part of me knows what's true? Yeah, if we take a moment to digest these questions, we will probably find out that those are questions that the conscious spiritual seeker, the conscious truth seeker, the conscious person asks all the time, but often not fully gets an understanding or an answer for. So let's do this systematically. Yeah, we can observe that we don't quite fully understand ourselves yet, that we are conflicted about who we are. And this is an interesting phenomenon if you think about it, because as humans we are equipped with the ability to ask this question. So if we have the ability to ask the question, who am I? And where am I going? And where did I come from? And why am I here? And that also means that the answer needs to be somewhere in us. The problem is that we are chasing an identity. We're trying to be somebody, never feeling good enough, which can lead us to question what it is that we're chasing, what it is that we think that we are. So this is the problem. Yeah, we think we are somebody, something, and yet it doesn't feel right. There are unanswered questions in us, and that is what we call a spiritual inquiry. It is basically the beginning of your journey to finding your true self. Yeah, the birth of your consciousness. It starts with this question, and it arises out of this problem, namely never feeling good enough or never feeling enough. So in this workshop, we will dive into the different levels of and spiritual reality of perceiving and expressing self. Yeah, this is a very, very big conversation that requires us to create a foundation where we can all sort of be picked up no matter how far we've already gotten in this inquiry. But what connects us all, what, forms sort of the common denominator, no matter where we are at in this inquiry, is the purpose and the application. If we can understand ourselves better, we can make better choices, leading to higher levels of inner peace and trust in self. That's something that connects us all. That is something that we're all seeking, that we all want. Higher levels of inner peace and trust in self. And obviously all that comes with that, the ability to discern truth, the ability to know where we're headed, to know what fulfills us, to know where to go, to know how to navigate life. So here it is again, this time a little bit more differentiated, but still on the level of, well, what are we even exploring here? What is this even about? Soul, I, spirit, ego, true self, higher self, future self, spirit self. And there's more, as you know. Are they the same? Years ago, we did a workshop series called Dimensions of Self already, and I introduced this graphic overview here, this depiction of something like a hierarchy, something like an arrangement of all these different selves that we are encountering on our, sacred self-healing or sacred exploration journey. The authentic self, the false self, the past self, the true self, the conscious self, the present self, the ego self, and so forth. And if you go to my YouTube channel and watch this again, especially the second part, you will hear me say that there is no real combined or unified science that can help us decode all these. Yes, that there is no unified consciousness science right now. We are getting there, guys. This was 5 years ago, and we are now presented with obviously new insights, new findings in material and nature science, and also new findings in spiritual science. And we will use these insights to discuss this. But before we get started on our conversation here, I would love to hear from you how you experience, how you understand, how you feel the difference between your ego self, your true self, your higher self, spirit or soul. We all have a different understanding, a different imagery of that. And depending on how we are looking at it, so try to, when you share now, try to let us know, if you can, from which perspective you are answering, if you can. And if you would like to know it because you don't know, then let me help you out. So how do you experience the different layers of yourself? Who wants to share? Don't be shy. This is a workshop. All right. So this is really about you here. Let's work this together.
Hi, Jona.
Hey, Matthew. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah. One of my things is the minute I'm in judgment, I know I'm in ego.
Okay.
So the minute I'm looking at something and there's a feeling of excessive need for judgment or some belief. It's been one of my shortcuts to work out that that's my ego, because my true self and my right now self doesn't need to have that judgment.
How did you find out about this? I mean, you're giving it a label, right? You're saying your true self. That's something that is deep in you. You say it doesn't have the need to do this, but yet you're experiencing another part of yourself, which you call the ego, that does that. How did you find out about this?
I think just, well, a lot of your stuff, realizing the separation over the years, and then becoming the observer and seeing myself in situations and going, oops, why did I see it that way? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and then being able to get it closer and closer to the moment, so it wasn't after some incident post-analyze and go, what did I don't see? It just gets closer and closer. So that's why the judgment side, and the minute I know, I mean, it must be this way, there's a voice in my head that comes up, it must be this way. It's like, whoa, hang on. Are you sure?
Yeah, so you experience, you experience a separation here. You're literally experiencing two souls in you, or two parts in you.
Two personas having a conversation.
Yes.
Or being one persona, being able to see the other persona within myself.
I love how you say that. At first, you just experienced it and did it, like the judgment, and then at some point in your life you became able to witness it. You became able to observe that, well, this is doing this by itself. I'm not really thinking this. I'm not really believing this. This is happening without the me, the true self doing this. Okay, so this is how I interpret what you just said. Is that
Perfect.
is that yeah? So this very, very cool.
And especially it came up a lot with anger. When my anger came up, it was like, who the hell is talking?
Nice. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was, whoa, what's this voice that's coming out of me? But at the beginning, it was like, oh, suppress it. And now it's like, if it comes up, it's like, okay, what have you got to share? Because you have to show up for whatever reason. So, yeah, that's the observer status that
so we can observe ourselves in different ways. Yeah, and
I think we all. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have different personas. We have a persona of the employee, the persona of the family member, the persona of the husband, the father, the mother, you know what I mean? There's all these different personas that we have to sort of juggle life through.
These roles that we
these
function,
roles.
Mm-hmm, the function that we have, and that has to do with the outer world, right? That if we are just with ourselves, it's perhaps a little easier, right, to stay with ourselves. But as soon as we get in contact with the outer world, with other people, as soon as we are, let's say, forced to fill in a certain role or become a certain persona, as you call it, it's probably better to say identity. Yeah. We are pulled into different parts of our personality. And you call them true self and ego as sort of a basic distinction, just a basic distinction, right?
Yeah, just very basic.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a good one.
Very basic.
It's a good one, and this is a one that I suggest that we start out with in the Sacred Self-Healing Program, because it is the first one that we can consciously experience ourselves. Like you wonderfully described this here for us. You know what that feels like when you experience, your ego talking, but your true self is somehow not agreeing with this and is noticing, oh wait, it is a part of me, but it is not the part of me that I truly choose. I did not choose this right now. It's kind of, there's something that is reacting. in me. Okay. And this is very, very common. Yeah. So we all have that. And if we start naming it, this separation, as you called it earlier, becomes more and more conscious to us. So I'm using this now as a foundation for all of us. Yeah. The first two sort of definitions of different layers or versions of ourselves, the true self and the ego. Let's continue working with this. But there are other ways of experiencing ourselves. The true self and the ego perspective has to do with, well, our psychology. Yeah, it is sort of how we choose to react to something. Let's hear others. Thank you, Matthew. What are other ways of experiencing ourselves or calling it? We have a true self and an ego, and that is something that we can all learn to work with. And psychology is quite helpful there. What are some other ways to experience ourselves?
Hi.
Hi.
For me, it changed really much when I realized that I could feel from my heart.
Mm.
Then there was something other than just, my ego. Or then I could start feeling something that I knew was not from my ego, but it was, yes, it's new for me to perhaps could say I could feel my soul.
Interesting. Yes. Okay. I say interesting because I love the caution and the thought that you guys put into wording it. I love this. This is the kind of precision that we want to learn here. Yeah. So you felt something inside of you that is much more based on your heart.
Yeah.
Are you referring to emotions when you say that, or are you referring to something yet deeper? Yeah, it's something
not
deeper.
Emotions. Yeah, it's not an emotion, it's a feeling.
It's a deep feeling, and you call this something that originates in your soul. Yeah. Even deeper than your personality or your psychology. Yeah, it's deeper
I'd
than
say
that.
so.
Yeah. Okay, nice. Thank you, Anita. Other ways of experiencing ourself. Let me just sort of jog your memory a little bit here. Go ahead.
I sort of see it like my ego is like a robot.
Okay.
And then going all the way up to just being.
Interesting. So you see, you recognize that there's a part of you that is robotic or machine-like, that is operating, say, on programs or algorithms or sort
of and sort of the doer.
The doer. And it's not necessarily something that you choose. It just goes on. It just does it.
Yeah, just for function.
Nice. So this is a slightly deeper definition of ego. Matthew brought in the roles that we play, the identities that the ego has to juggle, and you're bringing in the way it operates. Yeah, it operates based on programs. maybe conditioning or a learned coping. Yeah, but it does it sort of in a reactive, in an automatic way. There's not much thinking or choosing involved. It's a very good sort of a very good way of identifying our ego, Linda. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've refined that definition. It's one of those big hallmarks or methods of operation of our ego is exactly that. Thank you for contributing.
I'm just thinking about now that I think that I have known for really many years what my true self was, because I knew when I lied to myself or others that it was not true, but my consciousness was not high enough to, I did not know what else to do than lie to myself or others, but I knew that it was not true many, many years ago. But first when my consciousness was high enough, I could choose to change it.
Okay, very nice. This helps us to describe the true self a little bit better, right? The true self seems to be something that is not so much dependent on what happens on the outside. It doesn't necessarily try to fulfill a program or a role. It is something more absolute. Yeah, it is something like you could, like knowing what is true. Oh, you brought the word, I'm not sure if I heard this right, but it would be appropriate here in this context, conscience. Okay, so we have the consciousness, that's our awareness, and then we have a conscience that is something in us that operates maybe on our value system. Yeah, independent of, like, say, the role or the function. Yeah, so something that is perhaps more linked to integrity, inner integrity, like where we are true with ourselves. Yeah, and that is also to our choosing. But like you said, it requires a certain consciousness level to act on it. Yeah, so it might pop up and we might feel it, and this is what I earlier described as the inner conflict. Yeah, the absence of inner peace is where we feel, or as Matthew here called it, as a separation. We feel this as different parts of ourselves arguing with one another. Yeah, so
but I also think that when I felt that it was not true, it was from another place than from my mind. It was not my mind that say, oh, it's not right. I could feel it in my,
in your system, in your body, or whatever.
At that time I did not know where it was from. I could feel it. I know today it's from my heart, but I did not know it at that time, but I could feel it in my whole body. It's not true. And I remember at that time that it really hurts me when I lied to myself and others too, but it was what I could do.
Guys, what we're doing here is a very advanced conversation, and I don't want you to feel that we are going off on semantics, or just words here, but we have to start somewhere. Yeah, we have to start with how we understand these terms and then build on it. Yeah, so as we are exchanging, as we are wording this, okay, we're creating sort of a cloud here of terms that we can use to build our lexicon. Yeah, so we're doing this together, and that's why your sharing is super, super important. So let's go from here, okay, and look at what the before mentioned spiritual science has to say about the architecture of consciousness, yeah, of the human consciousness. So first of all, when we bring in sort of an outer structure, we always need to investigate it. This is very important because we have so many different structures or paradigms or frameworks that we can work with. We can work with a psychological framework. We can work with a biological framework. We can work with an anthropological framework. We can work with a religious framework. We can work with, well, pretty much any science that works with the human, which is ultimately all of our sciences. Yeah. Why? Because they are observed by a human. So all sciences ultimately come together, yeah, in one big science, yeah, that basically looks at the person, the observer, the one that is, yeah, looking at the world, trying to understand the world. And our nature science or material science explains the mechanisms. But what it cannot explain is the why. What are the laws, the rhythms, and the purpose? For example, why humans exist, what, they were supposed to do, or why planets rotate, or why planets exist. Yeah, we cannot answer any of these questions with any of the material sciences. And so if we just look at this distinction between the material and the spiritual, we can then say, okay, there needs to be a science that explains that which is underneath all the material. And that is basically what we call spiritual science. Spiritual science is the study of human consciousness by honoring all spiritual traditions without dogma. It is a living study because we are living, where you are the explorer, you are the scientist, basically. All right? That is what spiritual science is. It bridges the gap between science, what we observe and measure, through material science, and spirituality. Yeah, so spirituality is not the same as spiritual science. Spirituality is what we feel, sense, and know deep within, what we just exchanged. That is sort of an expression of our spirituality. It teaches that you are more than a body. You guys all just confirmed this, that you are, whatever you want to call this, energy, consciousness, soul, a heart, yeah, soul, or perhaps even spirit. There are spiritual laws like cause and effect, resonance, and karma that guide life. That is what spiritual science teaches. And this is just for us to get sort of an overview of these terms that we're using, yeah, and we're bringing in spiritual science to give it a little bit of structure, yeah, to give it a framework that we can work from. We can choose to explore it from different perspectives, and we can bring in all different kinds of experiences. We can bring in things that have been explored for thousands of years by all different kinds of spiritual or religious traditions, and we will not find a contradiction. Yeah, so this is what we call spiritual science. And the spiritual science sees the I as the center that chooses. Yeah, so there's no religion in here. It's just that when it comes to human consciousness, it is the I, yeah, the capital I, that chooses. So at the center of self is the I, the spiritual individuality that bridges the lower and the higher selves. And here, beautifully, matching up with what you guys shared earlier, the ego is defined as basically the counterpart, the lower counterpart to the I. The ego clings, the I witnesses. The ego reacts. That's the machine-like property that you brought up, Linda. The I responds. The ego distorts. That would be, Matthew, what you said about judgments. Okay, yeah, and the I discerns. Yeah, the ego clings, and that would be what you mentioned. Yeah, that it, wants to hold on to a certain, you called it lie, but really we can say illusion. Yeah, whereas the I in us witnesses reality. Yeah, the ego wants a certain reality. The I witnesses reality. The ego reacts robotically. It just does things in a conditioned, programmed, pre-programmed way. The I rather responds. The ego distorts through its filters, through its judgments, through its beliefs, conscious or unconscious, whereas the I discerns. Okay, so if we can all agree on this as a foundation, yeah, or a foundational distinction between the I and the ego, yeah, we use the I here in the same context as we would, or as we previously named it, the true self. Yeah, it is, when we investigate this a little deeper, not exactly the same, but there's rather stages, evolutionary stages of that. So we're looking at the I here as sort of the spiritual individuality. With the lower consciousness level, Annette, as you mentioned, the I is not fully formed. Yeah, it is already sort of coming into the awareness of a person through, say, pain, yeah, or through discomfort when we are not in congruence with our I, but it is not fully aware to us that it actually is a thing, that it actually is, yeah, something that identifies us. Yeah, that is the basically here an evolutionary process, and we call our I true self in the beginning, because all we can really feel in the beginning is the difference between like a false self, that would be sort of the part in us that fulfills these roles, that has these identities, and the true self. Yeah, that's the first distinction that we can make. If we go a little deeper into spiritual science, then we will find that it uses the fourfold human body as foundation. Basically constitutes that the human consciousness, and with it, the bodies that it incorporates, consists of three basic different layers. The first layer is the physical layer, that's commonly, what we call the body, yeah, the physical material form that we have, that we experience as the one that does, the hand, yeah, the hand that acts. Yeah, and there's other things tied to this. There's our image tied to this, yeah, when it comes to like how we see our physical form. Yeah, but the governing forces, yeah, that rule our physical form, yeah, that are defined through biology, anthropology, chemistry, and mechanics, yeah, are basically survival instinct based. Yeah, this is our sort of genetic disposition. Then we have the emotional, the psychological, the part in us that sees itself in these different roles in these different functions, yeah, our personality, our ego. Yeah, so below the ego is actually another part of us, and that is our physical. Yeah, if you just think of your autonomous nervous system, your autonomous nervous system does not respond to your ego. It just responds. It's even more machine-like. Yeah, it's really just chemical reactions. Yeah, versus our the second layer of our self-understanding, yeah, the emotional, the psychological part, yeah, that constitutes our ego, and it comes with a bunch of sort of elements, such as passion and desires and drives. Yeah, it's what we define sort of as the paradigm of avoiding pain and seeking pleasure. And this is very much sort of the expressed in our feelings, yeah, like how we feel about something, our sympathy and antipathy. Then the third layer of how we perceive ourselves is the mental part of us, yeah, like how we think about ourselves, yeah, and the thinking, yeah, is based on this whole process of thinking is based on constructs and forms, yeah, and in these constructs and forms there are beliefs, conscious or unconscious, conditioning and coping woven into it. Yeah, they're woven into it. So the way we think, for example, we need to be. Yeah, just think of your profession. These roles and functions that we play, they have to do with constructs. Yeah, this is how it's done, or this is how it needs to be done. Yeah, that takes place on the level of our thinking. And the fourth layer, and this is the one that of our concern here, yeah, is the layer of the true self. Yeah, the free and conscious thinking, feeling, and willing. Yeah, the ability to make conscious choices. Yes, the conscious being. So you mentioned this already, that there must be some kind of development in us, and maybe that's what we typically call wisdom or maturity. Yeah, there's the older we get, the more consciousness we seem to develop. So if we go a little deeper here and look at these different layers of ourselves now, really from the perspective of how do these stages of development, these stages of forming wisdom and consciousness, how do they occur? There is obviously a timely manner to them. So this accompanies us, this process, from the moment of birth to the moment of our death. And we're not putting any spiritual or religious understandings of afterlife or reincarnation into this yet. We're just looking at like how does this normally develop. The physical self, the 3D self, yeah, is defined through our physical form. And it creates an image of ourselves. Yeah, we all know this in our understanding of ourselves. Yeah, and if you think about how much of our daily life, yeah, from childhood on to today, derives around this perception of ourselves, how we perceive our 3D self. Guys, what would you say? How did this go in your development from childhood till today? How much of your daily thought forms, yeah, are deriving around your physical condition, percentage-wise? How you see yourself, how you want others to see you, how you present yourself?
I would say the younger, the more time I spend on it.
Uh-huh. So the
Yeah,
older you get, the less time you spend on.
yeah. It matters less
Mhm.
how, but yeah.
I mean,
So
it changes a little bit because when we
that,
get older and we have more aches and pains, right? We are still quite consumed by our physical, yeah. Just maybe not in a way of image, yeah, what other people think of us, but how we can operate, how we can move around, how we can act in this world.
Mhm.
The physical will always take precedence, guys, no matter how spiritual we are, because it is the densest form of ourself. So while we're more focused on sort of how others see us, yeah, from the outside in, when we are younger, when we're older, it shifts a bit more to the internal, but it's still quite prevalent. Yeah, it's very sort of domineering if you think about it. Yeah, if you feel bad in the morning, if let's say you're getting sick or you have some kind of ailment, a pinched nerve or something that inhibits your acting, okay, this can also affect the way you feel about yourself and the way you think about yourself and the world. Yeah, so let's not rule this out. Yeah, the physical 3D self has quite a strong impact on our understanding of ourselves. The psychological self, yeah, the personality that we have, that is, ruled by, how we operate, yeah, our reasoning, our motivation, why we're doing something. Yeah, it's often, yeah, and you guys have already discovered this connection, it's often influenced by our inner child. Think of how much of our way of seeing ourselves on this feeling level, yeah, and our motivation to do something is still driven by, let's say, trauma or, unfulfilled desires as children. Yeah, so the older we get, the more we can sequester that and can sort of hide this, but if we don't actually work on this, we can be still quite caught in our, sort of underdeveloped or undeveloped aspects of ourselves. Yeah, they can be quite domineering. Matthew, you mentioned anger, yeah, when that comes out, or fears when they come out, or doubts. Okay, a lot of times, guys, this points at your past self. Yeah, it points at what happened in the past. And that determines your feeling. Yeah, it determines your feeling, how you feel about yourself and what you are sort of, motivated to do. The intellectual self, the way you see yourself intellectually, is fundamentally based on a construct. Yeah, it's an ideal or not so ideal, depending on, how you, depending on your experiences. But it is a construct, and this is also where the roles and the functions come in. Yeah, it can supersede our physical condition. It can supersede our motivation to do something, because a lot of people, for example, fulfill a role that they don't necessarily like. Yeah, think of all the people that work jobs that they don't like, or they have to be in a certain way just to make needs end, to make living, or to fulfill sort of what is being expected from them. This is all based on constructs. And it isn't really until we start, like, as Matthew called it earlier, noticing the difference between all these different parts of ourselves, yeah, and see that there is a separation, yeah, that our physical self can want something different than our psychological, our emotional self, than our intellectual self, than our true self. So to make things a little harder here for us in this conversation, we are now actually differentiating the different layers of self a bit more. Yeah, not just the true self and the ego self. If we were to understand, ourselves just by those two terms, true self and ego self, then the red, orange, and yellow, yeah, the 3D psychological and intellectual self, together would be the ego self. Yeah, they work hand in hand. I used to call them the body mind. Yeah, this is where sort of how Linda said, where there's sort of patterns and rhythms and programs, okay, that make us do something. But the true self does not really, or is not part of that. It supersedes it. It is separate from it. When we are caught in our ego self, in these three layers of ourselves, we are not aware that there is another layer, that there is something like the true self there. But in the course of our life, in the course of our development, we are starting to become more and more aware of this part here in us. And in spiritual science, this part then is called the higher self, yeah, or the I. It is the conscious being. Yeah, the acting, feeling, and thinking can also happen without our consciousness. It can just so work. It's the ego you get for free. Remember, I always say that you get the ego for free, and you actually get a placeholder for the I for free, but you have to populate it. You have to work your consciousness in order for it to become an individualized being in you. Does this make sense? Yeah, we all have the capacity and the tools to develop our consciousness, but we don't all do it. And there's several reasons for this. This is a big part of our sacred self-healing program, yeah, where we investigate this, what can block this. The ideal is that we all develop our conscious I, yeah, our higher self. Now let's just real quick, just so we don't forget this, why? Why would this be the ideal? Why would we want to, well, spend the time, the work, the energy into developing our conscious self, into bridging the gap between our ego and our true self? What is your experience so far? Why would that be a desirable thing?
Because there's so much learning. There's so much learning in it.
What do we learn when we start to develop our consciousness?
We learn what it means to be human, to be in this 3D reality.
Okay, so there, it can answer a few of these questions. Yeah, maybe, yeah, just very simple, like what does it mean to be human? Okay, I'm human. Okay, what does that mean, right? And maybe it can answer things such as, why am I here? Yeah, what's my job? What am I supposed to do? I guess that's what you're referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can give us a better understanding of who we are. That's why we want to develop our consciousness. Now, again, one step back. Why do we want to have a better understanding of who we are? How does this serve us? Why is this desirable?
I feel much better.
Okay, on what level here? When you say feel?
It's, yes, when I can connect with myself and not driven by my ego, I can feel much more peace and love is a big word for me, but there is something that I now can feel that brings me much more fun than before.
Something like harmony, perhaps, or
Yes, and
balance, or unified.
Neutral.
Neutral.
I still work a lot on it because there's much more to learn, but I'm much more satisfied
Satisfied.
now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In psychology, we differentiate between satisfaction and fulfillment.
Yeah.
Okay, this for you as a non-English speaker, this distinction is probably a little hard, but what I hear you say is fulfillment.
Yeah, I can,
it's
much more.
There's less conflict.
Yeah.
There's more, meaning and purpose, really. You know, it fulfills you in a different way.
Much more purpose. I have never thought so much about it before, but now I can see what my or not all of it, but much more my purpose, and
connect with it.
Yeah, and it brings fulfillment.
So big word. You use big words, Annette. Connection,
I know.
fulfillment. Peace.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, just again a step back. If we do not feel connection, purpose, peace, what is the symptom of not developing a consciousness? You guys can answer that because you remember what it was like.
That is very painful, I would say.
In what way?
I remember it as painful.
In what way painful?
On
what level?
Emotional.
Emotional pain?
Yes.
Can you give us an example?
It is something about I think Annette was mentioning it. There's this inner conflict between the ego and the I, or the true self.
A constant fight? Like a constant fight?
You just know you have this inner feeling that you should do this or be like this, but you do something else, like you're taught by a parent.
It's an inner battle. The inner battle is perceived as painful.
And that is so painful. For me it was. Yeah.
What are some other symptoms of not developing consciousness? Anxiousness. Yes.
Yes, and I have always been very afraid of dying and all this
fears.
Yeah.
Being controlled by fears.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you brought this up, the fear of dying. I would like to talk about this in a moment, in a little bit, how developing consciousness can actually help us overcome the fear of dying, but or the fear of death. But yes, fear, definitely more fear, or less fear when we develop our consciousness, when we actively work on this. What else?
Yeah, all these things can also, in the end, they manifest in the physical.
Yes.
So that's the problem.
That's already a big, a deeper understanding here. Yeah, that you've already noticed that, this inner battle or the fear can lead to physical manifestations. We're going to go a little deeper here in a moment. Yeah, how that occurs, why that is the case. Spiritual science can give us the answers here. I'm also thinking of, like indecision, for example. not being able to know what to do. Yeah, like not being able to choose, not being able to make good choices, not being
Yes, I'll say a lot of doubt. I have had so much
yes,
doubt in my
yeah.
life that it has holding me really
And
back because
and it's connected, right? The doubt then creates this inner battle, right?
yeah,
And mental looping,
yeah,
constant sort of
yeah,
back and forth. That then creates, like Annette, like you said, pain. It's painful to constantly and to be stuck somewhere and to not know what to do or what's the right thing or where should I go. Like with having no purpose, having no awareness of who we are creates a really, really strong discomfort in us. And by the way, this is one of the, well, if you will, proofs, okay, that we are supposed to develop consciousness. This is something that connects all of us humans. No matter where in the world we live, what tribe we're from, or what past we have, or religion, or whatever. Fear, anger, doubt, and all the manifestations thereof are experienced as the strongest discomfort for us humans. Some of us are more aware of it than others. Most of us, up to a certain point in our life, don't actually think about it. We think it's normal, until we develop, and then we realize, oh, wow, I was so conflicted. I was so in fear and doubt and anger all the time. Dang, I didn't even realize I was. This is what I meant earlier with we don't even know we have a choice. So apparently, developing our consciousness brings in not just more awareness of who we are and what we're doing and what we're supposed to do, but it also brings in more freedom. It brings in more choice. And that is something that I would like to go a little deeper with. How does it do that? Why? I mean, if it was that easy, why doesn't everybody work on their consciousness? Well, maybe you guys already have an answer. Why doesn't everybody do this? What's separating here? What's the problem with that separation? There's something we must do in order to become able to consciously develop this. Yeah, go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah, no, for myself, it was getting to a point of having to just believe in the next moment and actually like step through all of the fear and everything.
All right, how
don't know
did this
how
come
more
about
explain it.
in your life? How did this come about in your life?
It's come about multiple times on sort of life-threatening environments.
Okay.
One was, you know what I mean? It grounded me into a reality of I can't think my way out of this problem, and it's like, yeah, someone else help, you know. But it was, and then trusting in those moments, and things just changed. You know what I mean? I didn't know how they were going to change. I didn't predict them, but things shifted.
So what I hear you say, Matthew, is that the barrier, or sort of what needs to be overcome, typically only happens in our lives in what you call life-threatening situations, maybe a catharsis, a trauma, an actual life-threatening, like a life or death situation, an extreme situation. So in extreme situations, Yeah, let's just sort of digest this here for a moment. And when it's about life or death, or when it's, when we're at the end of our wits, something else can set in. And this isn't just you, Matthew. I think we can all subscribe to this. Yeah, that these extremely painful, extremely challenging, extremely traumatic or threatening experiences in our life can trigger the development of our consciousness. How does this happen? Through the experience, through overcoming, through learning that we can overcome these extreme challenges. So in psychology it's called catharsis, or in religion as well. Yeah, there's something, yeah, that happens to us, yeah, like an intervention almost, that forces us, yeah, to access our higher abilities. Now, we weren't taught that in school, right? We were taught that if you just go by, the program, yeah, here, the red, orange, and yellow, if you just go by the program and don't think too much about it, you're going to get happy. You're going to get successful. Only for us to find out that that's not a guarantee. A lot of times in our life, it is actually those challenges, those traumatic experiences that allow us to shift into our higher consciousness. So this would be the normal developmental journey, yeah, of us humans without sort of an inner spiritual prompting. Yeah, without an inner spiritual prompting, the way humans gain higher consciousness is typically through trauma, and that's the barrier. So we don't want to experience that. We don't want to go through that. Yeah, we choose to stay in our comfort, yeah, and don't want to go there because it requires us, yeah, to let go of all these forms, these constructs, these ideals, these things that we are clinging on to, our ego is clinging on to. This is the reason why we experience basically the presence of our conscious self and our ego self at the same time as painful. Yeah, this separation that you guys mentioned earlier is perceived as painful. This is a human phenomenon. Now, I mentioned something. I talked about the spiritual impulse. We haven't touched that yet because there's also other ways to develop consciousness or to awaken to our consciousness. So what are your experiences there? Who of you would say that they had some kind of spiritual prompting or a spiritual impulse that led them to even investigate all these things without a life or death situation?
Yeah, I would say that. I've always felt that something inside of me wanted to search for something, and there was actually, it was also out of feeling the pain inside, but it was not like a life or death.
It was just the residual pain that we talked
Yeah,
about
yeah,
earlier, that
that
separation.
search to find out what is going on, why am I here, why do I experience all this pain, and
Yeah, so spiritual inquiry. Yeah, that's how we call this sort of in spiritual science language. Yeah, there's a prompting to inquire, to ask questions. Yeah, or to find answers, to seek
yes,
something. Seeking. Yeah, seeking is, and humans are the only species, yeah, on this planet, only living species that does that, seeking answers. seeking, asking questions.
And there was also, I would say, there was this hunger feeling for it. I always had that.
A feeling. Can you
Of,
describe that?
yeah, a feeling of hunger
A hunger.
for,
Yes.
for it.
Not just an intellectual
No,
seeking for
no,
knowledge.
definitely not.
A hunger or thirst,
Yeah,
yes.
that I actually didn't know what it was back then. Yeah, but I can see it was there very early on. Yeah.
What are some other spiritual experiences that we can have, sort of, that can trigger us wanting to explore
For
these
me,
unseen realms?
yeah, there have been some different things, but in a way, I think that I couldn't live the life that I thought that was the right way, with the family and children and house and a car and such things. It couldn't work for me. So I also started to inquire about why was it so for me, and there was a lot of judgment to it also. But
That you had to overcome that first, yeah.
Yeah. But it started with and the anxiousness for men, and I couldn't understand why it was so, and
There's got to be
so
more. There's got to be more to it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I started trying to figure out what the reason was, and yeah.
There's got to be more. This is like a seeking for purpose, like a different purpose than what our society sort of attributes to us as our functional role. You were looking for purpose beyond just the societal role.
Yeah.
Any other spiritual impulses that you have experienced, or that you can see how they triggered maybe the spiritual inquiry in you? Or maybe not just the spiritual inquiry, but also the spiritual exploration, wanting to feel something. I remember for myself, as a young child, hearing certain kinds of music, seeing certain kinds of paintings and images, triggered a deep sort of feeling in me. I'm just calling it this way right now because at the time I wouldn't know what this was. That informed me that there is more. Yeah, there is more. Something that New Age, we would probably call this like angel realms or something. Yeah, there was a sort of a part of me that was responding to certain things in ways that had nothing to do with my physical self. It created a feeling in me that allowed me to experience myself in a completely different way. More so as a soul self, if you will. Sometimes this also came with a deep, deep longing or sadness. What I would have called sadness at the time. Go ahead, Anita.
Yeah. For me, I have the same, but it was with nature.
This is nature. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had some experience as a child. I had this,
like a deep connection with something.
Yeah.
Beyond just the physical senses.
Being in heaven or something like that. And I can still when I go to places in nature that's a bit similar, I can get to that feeling again.
So there is something there in us, apparently, that we are not really aware of, that is going on inside of us throughout our lives. That until we make it conscious, okay, is sort of in the hidden, in the unseen. Spiritual science gives us a little bit more answers here as it, sort of differentiates between those 4 different layers of ourselves and how we are composed in this material world. We are composed of the physical form. We are also composed of an astral, sort of a soul body, that carries all this information that we just talked about when we talked about sort of spiritual experiences. Then we are also composed of our etheric body, which is sort of what feeds the physical form. It is the vitality, the life force, that plays into our physical. So technically, I would put the etheric layer here into the second layer because it is directly linked with the physical. The soul body, the astral body, is not directly linked with the physical. It is much closer linked to the I, and ultimately delivers the strongest drive, this hunger, this thirst that you described, Annette. It delivers it. That's where it originates. It originates in our astral body. Our etheric body is the one that forms our physical reality. The way we think about things, the way we frame things, that is how we manifest our physical world. And you guys all experienced this when you shifted your perspective on things. This could be anything from your political perspective to your religious perspective to your even scientific perspective on things. You begin to see things with different eyes. So the etheric has a lot to do with our perception, and it goes both ways. When we experience these 4 different bodies interacting with one another, and how this basically then plays into our life as a physical manifestation. This is something that you guys mentioned earlier, where I think Annette was you said that this pain or the separation that we can sometimes experience can also manifest in our physical. So the way we see the world is how we interact with it, and that can create all sorts of problems, including physical problems. So we know this today on modern medical science, that the way we think about things influences the way our body forms, the way our body reacts in the physical world. And so there is a very strong connection between our etheric body and our physical body through the way we think about things. And it is the thinking that mainly influences the way we feel on this ego level. So if I think this is a good idea, I can talk myself into anything. I can create a narrative, or I can create a justification or a good reason. I can rationalize things, and that then changes the way I feel about what I'm doing, and that can then activate, my body to do things. This is how it goes in an unconscious person. But it always starts, and most are not aware of this, with the way we think about things. Because it has a lot to do with the framework that we're using, with the ideals sometimes also. Yeah, the mental framework. So this is how unconscious manifestation works. The I is not involved in this because we're not conscious enough yet. When the I comes into the manifestation process, yeah, but the conscious manifestation, what happens is that our inside, yeah, our what we have learned through our conscious inquiry, yeah, can deliver enough energy, can deliver enough imprint onto our etheric that we then manifest what it is that we want to become. This is something that is a bit advanced, but when you realize that you have a choice, yeah, via your consciousness, you can then create or co-create your own reality. This is not something that all of us have mastered yet. So as a whole humanity, we're still trying to discover that. Yeah, we're still trying to reproduce that. But in spiritual science, we already know that it is the consciousness, yeah, it is the I, okay, yeah, the individualized soul being in us, yeah, that can supersede our etheric forms, our etheric thought forms, okay, change them, yeah, into something higher, yeah, can find higher expressions and manifest them all the way into the physical 3D. The reason why we have such a hard time with this is because we're not aware of this distinction of our four bodies, we also not aware of blocks that exist there. So as conscious energy healers or self-healers, okay, we are a little bit closer to that because we can already feel the separation, and in most of our cases we're working on strengthening, refining our I, and can therefore better detect when we are not in our true self. Yeah, we can identify this. We can identify, for example, when we have unconscious beliefs, that work against what we want. Yeah, many of you, for example, complain about judgment, that you're still so much in your judgment, and these are unconscious, programmed, conditioned thought forms that we have. I gave it a number. I said that 80% of our thought forms aren't our own. We have not really chosen them. We have not really thought them ourselves. And therefore, if we just go by this simple 80-20 model, 80% of our manifestations are not conscious. Yeah, so this is something that we can change. This is our I, our conscious I, our true self that can inform us about it. And it does that through what you guys reported as this pain, or the feeling, the separation. But the reason why most of our manifestation attempts, trying to change our life, trying to do something on our own without, the trauma or the life or death situation, is because we have a block there in our etheric. We're not developed enough, to perceive our own etheric self that would or could and does inform us, for those of us who can, about congruence, whether or not these thought forms that we are thinking are even in alignment with our I. Yeah, so this is what a block in our etheric can be caused by, incongruence, and you guys all know this already. There are other reasons why we can be blocked in our etheric body, and that has to do with outer influences. I report a lot about this when I report about collective energies, that we are currently living in a time of heavy, heavy etheric bombardment, which means that there are forces which I identify as dark forces, or as Rudolf Steiner calls them, adversarial forces, but more neutral to say it this way, that feed us with etheric thought forms that conform or filter our thoughts in ways that make us believe that we are only sort of a machine-like being. Yeah, this is a very important side note here, and something that we've already addressed a few times in the duality of darkness, or, understanding that there are, beings here in the unseen spiritual world, the etheric layer, okay, that are not interested in us developing this individualized I consciousness, okay, because they seek control over, our way of thinking, and with it then the materialization of spirituality. And if this is a little bit over your head, that is okay. Yeah, I just find it, for comprehensiveness, I find it important to mention these things here. The second most common reason why our manifestation is blocked, yeah, even if we have a developed I, and we already understand sort of the importance of having our own thought forms, and let's say we are able to navigate sort of the etheric field of our own being, which is, by the way, what I train here at transCODES with the various programs that I have. Yeah, the etheric perception is trained in the energy training course. That is a 6-week course where I systematically help you build your etheric vision through energy sessions, and so that you can experience it for yourself. The block in the astral is a lot harder to come by. The block in the astral, if you consider your astral body as sort of your soul body, where your deepest desire, this longing, this hunger, this thirst originates. If what it is that you want to manifest, let's say, you're a conscious person and you want to you understand that connecting with other people, and collaborating and building a better world, and unifying and so forth. Yeah, this is all coming from your etheric. You understand that you have a higher level of intellectual understanding of these things, but there's something there that is not aligning with your soul self. This could be something like karmic aspects. There are certain aspects of your soul that need to, be experienced in this lifetime. Yeah, kind of like a karmic debt. Yes, unfinished business, if you will, from perhaps previous lifetimes, or things that your higher self, yeah, in before incarnation determined, based on your past experiences, that you need to have, that are still needed for your soul development. So our soul also goes through a developmental journey. This is not the same as our I, guys. Yeah, so the I is what we can and are out here to refine in our physical 3D life. Yeah, it can only be done here in the physical 3D. The soul, however, is the one that basically receives all that you develop through your I. Yeah, it's the food for your soul. Yeah, so the more conscious you become, the more consciously you interact with your etheric self and your astral self, the more, or the farther your soul develops. Yeah, so we're basically here in this physical world, yeah, to master our I, so that it can imprint onto our soul, yeah, as sort of check learned experiences, yeah, and then work its way into the etheric that then begins to change our physical reality, all the way to changing our physical body. Yeah, so all these stories that you've heard about, like transformations that people go through, and also the way people change, the way they look, the way their life changes when they develop their consciousness, those are true. Okay, and on a longer timeline, yeah, is sort of beyond just one lifetime, but multiple physical lifetimes, yeah, the ultimate goal is to spiritualize ourselves, our bodies again. Yeah, so this is sort of the bigger sort of human plan, okay, yeah, as a whole entire collective, yeah, to develop the consciousness soul, yeah, to allow that, yeah, to feed, yeah, your soul to the point that your I then imprints itself into the etheric body that can resurrect, that can form your sort of glorified etheric body, which is what we have been introduced to by Christ. The Christ story, guys, is more than just a religion. The Christ story from a spiritual science point of view is the template of human soul development. Yeah, and also shows the importance of the physical experience for the soul, with the goal, yeah, to spiritualize the physical. And we will go deeper into this when we start the new workshop series that I'm very excited about. But for now, I just want to let you know that if there is a block here, yeah, in your astral, on your soul level, yeah, let's say you already know what the quote-unquote right or conscious thing to do is, but you still have experiences that the soul needs to make, yeah, or they do not work, they're not aligned, yeah, to your soul development, then that can also block your manifestation. And this, a typical example for a block in the astral would be to not fully understand the deeper esoteric secrets of your soul. Yeah, and this has to do with the teachings of reincarnation, the teachings of the glorified etheric body, the teachings of spiritual hierarchies. Yeah, in order to fully align with your soul's purpose, if you will, or your soul's training course, okay, you need to also understand what the motivation is for your soul, where this needs to go. Yeah, because the deepest level of motivation for us comes from our astral body. That needs to be understood. Yeah, and for that, we need to dive deeper into spiritual science. So here then is latest a question that was also a reason for me to set up this workshop. Namely, well, what is spirit then? Yeah, how do you experience spirit? Because that would be the part that links you into your astral body. How do you experience spirit? And this is where most of us still have, without judgment now, but this slightly underdeveloped understanding because we have been so indoctrinated with the dogma of religion or atheism, yeah, however you want to call it, yeah, the forced beliefs about what spirit is. So part of our consciousness development, this is basically what I'm saying, is to learn and better understand, all these terms such as, soul, God, Spirit, Holy Spirit, Father, Son. What does all this mean? And if we have been brandmarked or traumatized, yeah, by religious institutions or dogma, okay, then we are blocked in that area and can't really work together with our astral, our soul on that level. The journey that our soul goes through, from the perspective of spiritual science, is that in ancient times, the goal was to develop a sentient soul. These are different kinds of souls. This is then, like a preview here for you into spiritual science. Then to form something like an intellectual soul. This happened sort of during the Greco-Roman era, to overcome the fear of death, the fear of materialism, and the time span, the era that we're in right now is the era of forming our consciousness soul. So to become consciously aware of our soul. And when we do this, we have to individualize as a soul being. And in that lies a strong sort of separation impulse. We have to separate our being from, our tribal inheritance, so to speak. We have to see ourselves as a conscious, individualized being, and that comes with a certain amount of pain. This is the pain that you guys described. It's the pain of loneliness, the pain of feeling disconnected with something, and it comes to you as this spiritual impulse, this hunger and thirst for connection and unification and harmony, and brings about in its highest form, learning how to truly love, learning how to devote yourself to, what we would call, the love for life. There are 3 more stages here in this timeline that we are in that we still have to develop, as human spirit selves. Okay, they come, in the time span of many thousand years after, this particular time that we are in right now. But some of you guys can already feel this. So there's the imaginative soul, the inspirational soul, and the intuitive soul. That come with different tasks. Learning to discern, visioning from projections. Learning to trust in your higher self's guidance. And learning to communicate with higher beings, with the spirit realm. For this we need higher spiritual education. This is called esotericism, and it has been kept from humans. Only a few initiates or people that devoted their entire life to this spiritual teaching, were initiated into this knowledge. The monks and the sages and so forth. This is different now. This is different now. We can have access to this knowledge, but in order for us to fully process that and understand that, we first need to make this one or cross this one barrier. We have to build that bridge between the material and the spiritual world via developing our consciousness. And it isn't until then that we can even grasp these concepts, of higher spiritual hierarchies, of darkness, and, things that have to do with the divine plan, so to speak, what the human spirit being even is. There's so much more to learn. But I do not want to confuse you with this right now. Instead, I want to go one step back now and give you an example and close with this example of what this true self journey or the conscious I journey, what we can see sort of as an archetypal example. And I've picked the Apostle Paul that you guys all know from the New Testament and his experiences in Damascus. This is basically sort of the blueprint for us, of the experience that we make in the course of our life, this transformation that we all go through, yeah, and the turning points, yeah, what triggers, this development in us as we go by using Paul, which was originally called Saul, as an example. Yeah, Saul was on the road to Damascus. He used to be a prosecutor of the early Christians at the time. So this is after Jesus' death and resurrection and ascension. And it helps us to understand this journey to our conscious self, because he, on this journey, went through one of the most dramatic and transformative events in the New Testament as a person. Not Christ went through this transformation, but Paul is the one that goes through this transformation as a human. It marks the turning point where his identity changes from Saul, yeah, a fierce prosecutor of early Christians, to becoming Paul, the apostle, a foundational figure in spreading the message of Christ. And so there is this story, you can look this all up in Acts 9:1 till 19 and 22 to 26. Saul was traveling from Jerusalem to Damascus with the authority of the high priest to arrest followers of Jesus. He was a zealous Pharisee, convinced he was serving God by silencing what he saw as heresy. As he neared Damascus, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" And Saul replied, "Who are you, Lord?" The voice answered, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Now get up and go to the city, and you will be told what you must do." Let me change the slide here so you can follow me there. What happened there? What happened next was a blinding light. So Saul was struck blind for 3 days. This symbolizes the ego death and the forced eternal turning, like we talked about earlier. Yeah, like a traumatic event, like a catharsis, a dark night of the soul. And an inner collapse of certainty occurred. Saul's deeply ingrained beliefs were shattered. His worldview dissolved, this is the etheric, yeah, on which this occurs, in the face of divine presence. Direct encounter with Christ, unlike hearing about Jesus secondhand, Saul met the resurrected Christ directly in the etheric. This mystical encounter awakened him to a higher spiritual truth. Some of us have had that as well. The archetypal meaning is that Paul's Damascus experience is basically showing us the spiritual initiation process. Yeah, it occurs through a total collapse of the false self. Yeah, these personalities that we talked about earlier, the ego, the doctrines, yeah, and all those unconscious beliefs, and the emergence of the true self. Yeah, which aligns a person to their soul self, yeah, via spirit, yeah, which then brings in sort of love and truth as a sense, yeah, as an ability. It's the ultimate destiny moment, a collision with truth that forever alters one's trajectory. It's the surrender of control. Yeah, we all know this as the ego death, the rebirth through divine grace, and the integration of spirit and purpose. So in a way, guys, yeah, and this may make some of you feel a little bit uncomfortable because you're probably still dealing with a lot of contradictions around Christianity or religion. But we have to understand that, the Bible, and especially the New Testament, yeah, that they are a important witness, yeah, of what people understood spiritually, yeah, at the time, yeah, just like the Bhagavad Gita or other Buddhic or Vedic scripture, Persian scripture, those serve spiritual science as foundation, yeah, to understand sort of what we as humans collectively have brought forward as, our spiritual understanding. So it's absolutely scientific to use the scripture, to use, this particular example here, yeah, as or to describe a spiritual initiation process, because it was described over, well, not over, roughly 2,000 years ago. Yeah, and that is the journey from the zealous ego, yeah, which is ruled by control, by certainty, by righteousness or judgment, as you guys often call it. Then some kind of divine interruption or intervention, as we always call it, yeah, where we have to go through the dark night of the soul, yeah, which then leads to an inner awakening. I think, Matthew, you called it earlier, you being forced to let go of all this, what your ego sort of says and does, and, sort of access, yeah, your higher abilities. Yeah, this is the death of the old self comes then with a spiritual awakening. It comes with, well, what we call healing. It comes with grace. It comes with a feeling of relief, with the feeling of, yeah, being saved in a way, yeah, being guided, being protected, being nourished. Yeah, this is what we call healing. Yeah, it lifts us into sort of a higher perception, into a higher resonance. Yeah, and then leads to the emergence of the true self, or the development of the I. Yeah, by feeling, first of all, understanding oneself better, and with it then feeling more something like purpose. So with this, I wanted to close just to give you sort of an introduction into sober spiritual investigation, yeah, and why it is even interesting for us not just to follow our spiritual impulse for gaining spiritual knowledge, yeah, because spiritual knowledge alone is not enough to develop consciousness. It has to go hand in hand with our inner experience of something else, yeah, and that is fundamentally, the experience of our spirit self, or spirit, yeah, as you probably called, acting through you, yeah, the higher self that is in you, yeah, that can, guide you, that can nourish you, that can protect you. And in order for us to become able to even just a little bit discern between those different parts of ourselves, we have to train this. Yeah, and it is not enough to just read up on it, guys. It has to be applied. It has to be worked through. It has to be experienced. And guess what? The single most important skill is that we need to do this, and this will surprise you. It is the willingness to connect. The willingness to step out of your sort of ego self bubble, yeah, that at first is formed to protect you, to, secure your survival, but then becomes your prison, because it does not allow you to understand yourself. All it does is that it allows you to function, yeah, sort of on a robotic level of self, and with it also become extremely susceptible to outer influences, including dark or adversarial forces, because they operate on that level. Yeah, these 7 deadly sins, or everything that you have heard about, temptations and compulsions and so forth, addictions, comes in and addresses your ego self. This is why, the biggest issues in our lives, such as the issues that relate to happiness and fulfillment, physical health, love, truth, freedom, inner peace, harmony, cannot be resolved with our ego self. They can only be resolved with stepping into the higher self, which we at first encounter as our true self, and then continue to work with it. So once a person makes that step, that transformation, and goes through the death of the ego, and that awakening is a huge new potential, and with it also a complete transformation of the way you see the world, how you see yourself, how you feel about yourself, and the freedom to choose, the ability to discern truth, and the ability to feel something like purpose. It's a complete game changer. And many of you already know this, so I don't really need to explain to you why that is desirable. We did go through it though, because we were using spiritual science and sort of sober investigation, to get here. But there is more to this. It's not just something that is desirable. It is basically on the agenda now. It is our job as a human collective to develop this. So if you will, you can see yourself as pioneers, as forerunners for this, and with it then also the ones that become the carriers of that. And that can only be fulfilling or, fulfilled if you then go back out with it. You cannot do this just hold on to this. This would be an ego notion. To just consume spirituality, to hold on, to cling to it, is ego. And not the true light, if you will. The true light shines spontaneously. And you don't have to go out and stand on an orange box and preach. You just have to become it. So this is it here from my end, trying to cover the biggest mystery of human consciousness in less than 2 hours. And I would like you to feel free to ask questions. Also, give me comments. How did you experience the way I structured this? Were you able to follow me? And if
Yeah,
not, where did you lose me?
yes, I would say so. There's just still the question about the spirit. I don't understand that part still. But yeah,
Which part? Sorry.
what the spirit is, where does I put that?
Okay.
Yeah, it's like what you talked about, all the religion pre-programming and all that. I guess I'm affected by that because I really don't know where to put that.
Okay.
I know the eye.
It would be overzealous of me, to answer that for you. Okay, but I can give you an analogy. I can talk now like they talked in the Bible. Okay. It is Paul who says It is not me, but the Christ through me that speaks and acts. It is not me, but the Christ, if you will, the Spirit that acts through me. So all I can say here is that when you develop your consciousness to a point where you can feel, your higher self, or you can connect with your higher self, yes, that another transformation occurs. And that is where you realize that the you in you, what you previously experienced as the you, doesn't actually do anything. Yeah, that it's fundamentally all guided through a higher consciousness, if you will. Yeah? A higher consciousness that acts through you as spirit. If you want to get really into the semantics of it, then spirit is basically your higher conscious thinking. Yeah, your higher perspective, your higher perception, sorry. You begin to see yourself how the divine sees you. That these cues, are they working for you, Annette?
Yes, I understand, and I can feel it, and I can see I have to work with the word spirit because there is something there.
Yeah, there's a block there.
Yeah, because I know what you were saying. I understood it.
Mm-hmm.
But the word spirit is simply just like I had with the word God at a point. So it's the same. So
It's the same in
so
a way. But
yeah,
God is not just this one, like, old man with the beard sitting on a cloud. This is a very childlike version of
but it's,
God,
I
and
feel the
with more consciousness, and with the addition I mentioned earlier that we need further education on, for example, the spiritual hierarchies and so forth to fully answer that. Okay, but the more consciousness you gain, the more differentiated your perspective on spirit and soul becomes.
yeah.
Yeah, so you recognize it's not just one soul. Okay, there's multiple aspects of your soul. God, yeah, another dimension. Okay, and spirit, there's multiple aspects of spirit.
Mm.
Yeah, but the one that we can connect with, the one that we can work with, is the spirit that works through us, because that is the one we can actually experience here in this physical lifetime ourselves. Some of it also gets lost in translation, honestly. I mean, even if you look at the different translations of the Bible, etc., you see how the translation from the Greek into the Hebrew, into the Latin, into the German, into the Danish, in your case, and some translations were directly from the Latin. But the Greek version was the first original version, how it was written down. How these translations, all chose different ways of working with, these words. And that's why there are different versions of the Bible, because it really depends on the translation. So, in Danish, okay, this distinction, that we do in English, for example, might go different. We have encountered this many times with the word grace. Yeah, the word grace is also something that is very difficult to translate. Yeah, grace is basically how Spirit works through us in form of virtues that we develop. We develop virtues. Yeah. I call them truth, freedom, and love, just because those are things that we can directly connect with. Yeah, but in sort of a deeper investigation, you'll find that these are, elements or aspects of spirit. So it's wonderful that your mind comes up with these questions, but at the end of the day, like I said, we cannot fathom these higher spiritual concepts with our mind alone. They can only be experienced when we have enough consciousness to discern this. This is just like with truth. You cannot see truth if you don't have a high enough consciousness. And once you do, it's as clear as day, and you can't remember really what it was like before you could see it. And this is the part that scares our ego, because ultimately the reality is that there's a lot of things out there that we cannot see. No, basically everything in the unseen. And that's why science has such a hard time explaining life, and defining it, because for as long as it excludes the unseen, it cannot be answered. The only definition that science, material science, can come up with to define life is a machine-like being. And we all know that that is not the truth. Yeah, so our collective currently works with a definition of life that is based on material science only, and is therefore false, which is one of the things that we need to break through here in these next decades. Yeah. We have to add spiritual science to the picture, because without it, we cannot come to accurate definitions of what life is, what love is, what truth is, what it means to be human. Because we're so much more than just the physical, material being that we are. So you see how that simple question, what is spirit, triggers sort of another cloud of, or another realm, of prerequisites, if you will. Not to say that you don't know what spirit is, Annette, because I actually know this for a fact, because I'm your spiritual coach, that you've already had the experience of yourself as a spirit self. Okay? But again, in your case, it also goes back to translations. So it might actually be worthwhile if you're not a native English speaker, to seek spiritual scripture. If you live in the Western world, use your Western spiritual scripture, which is the Bible, and read up on these things. And help your mind, to better put these things together. But it is both that needs to come together in the end. And that's the inquiry and the experience. And then the cultivation of it, the application, and the refinement. Thank you for asking this question. Any other questions here at this point?
I'll say I had exactly the same question as Annette.
Right.
So, yeah.
Ask yourselves, why? Why do you have that question?
I thought that I had a kind of feeling for what my soul feels like.
Okay.
And then when the spirit, I thought, how can I feel my spirit, and how does it's how can I how can I feel my spirit and how can I feel my soul, and are they feeling different, or it was I think it's a little in my mind mostly.
A little bit, but it's valid.
Yeah.
Those are valid questions. Those are spiritual questions, and you will find the answers in spiritual disciplines. Okay,
Yeah.
in meditating, in contemplating, praying. Those are very typical spiritual disciplines. And that's where you will find the answers. All I can do here is give you a framework, okay, and throw, these terms at you and tell you there's much more to these things, okay? Yeah, just like how we picture God as this like old man with a white beard on a cloud as a child. Yeah, you certainly don't see it this way anymore. Okay,
No.
but there was a whole sort of evolutionary process behind that. Yeah, and you are now entering the process of investigating yourself. What is my soul? What is my spirit? It's wonderful.
Yeah. I have just I'm just more curious now about these things, so it's all good, I think.
Well, if that is what this workshop has done for you, Annette, then I am fulfilled. Then I am happy. Okay.
I feel so. Yeah.
Thank you for that feedback. Okay, because if that is what comes out of 2 hours of talking about these different levels of self or the architecture of our conscious self, then I know that I've spirit acted through me. Okay. Guys, I have to go now. I am delighted. I've had a good time. I hope that you guys are not too confused. If you have questions, please post them. Okay. I will put this video up on YouTube as a free community video, and you can respond there. You can ask questions. Yeah. I'm sure that there will be many questions, but before you write your question down, do one thing. Contemplate about why you want to know it. Yeah. Let's not forget, the heart of the matter. The questions will arise in the order of your developing consciousness, guys. This is basically the rule. Yeah, which means that as you are asking questions, your higher self is already prompting you, with this knowledge that is already in you. You wouldn't be able to ask this question if there wasn't a prompting in you. So as you're asking yourself, why am I asking this? Maybe dig a little deeper. Is there an impulse there? Is there a feeling there? Is there something there? Yeah, and work with your inner insight. Feel this and think this through on your own. Yeah, so that you can own it. Yeah, the purpose of individualizing ourselves as a spirit self is that we get there ourselves. Thank you so much. I'm super happy about your guys' coming here and asking questions and sharing. Yeah, and I would love to continue this discussion with our new workshop series after we've concluded the building the bridge between the physical and material and spiritual world. Have a wonderful rest of your day and see you very soon. Bye-bye.